This webinar is now live.
Just waiting for people to filter in. Good evening and welcome to Dana's webinar tonight, Start Living on Your Own Terms. This is a webinar for nurse practitioners and nurses interested in private practice. And as we gather for this meeting, physically dispersed and virtually constructed, let us take a moment to reflect the meaning of place and in doing so recognise the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, of all the land we work and live on and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. My name is Adam Searby. I'm the current president of Dana, and I'd just like to take the opportunity all to welcome you all to this webinar this evening on nurse practitioners working in private practice. We hope you find a lot of value from it tonight. We've got three speakers tonight. Our first is Margaret Foe, who is a solicitor of the Supreme Court of New South Wales and will talk to us about unravelling the mysteries of Medicare. We've also got Darren Smythe, who most of you will know as our erstwhile president, the former president of Dana himself. He's going to share with us his experiences of working as a nurse practitioner in transition to private practice. And then I'm pretty excited to be able to share with you the preliminary results of some of the research we've been doing as an extension of our State of the Workforce project that some of you might have already heard about and seen us present on. So we extended that to look at nurse practitioners to provide an overview of nurse practitioners in Australia. Firstly, I want to introduce Margaret Foe. As I mentioned, she's a solicitor of the Supreme Court of New South Wales and the High Court of Australia, having practiced law for over 2 decades. Margaret is an academic scholar of Medicare and health insurance law, a PhD candidate on the topic of Medicare claiming and compliance. Margaret has published in peer-reviewed journals on the topic of Medicare compliance and submitted a doctoral thesis for examination on 30th of November 2020. Fingers crossed, hopefully it will be formally passed early in 2021. Margaret has also been administering medical billing since Medicare began across every medical specialty, is a registered nurse and the founder and CEO of global medtech company Synapse Medical, which operates one of the largest medical billing services in Australia via an app-based billing system with Australia's only medical billing rules engine. Margaret is passionate about supporting doctors with their Medicare compliance obligations and unravelling the mysteries of Medicare, and established Synapse's training academy, the Australian Institute of Medical Administration and Compliance, AMAC, to further that purpose. AMAC offers the only comprehensive online courses on medical billing in this country. Margaret is considered one of Australia's leading experts on the operation of Medicare and contributes widely to the national health reform debate. As I mentioned before, her PhD on Medicare claiming and compliance is currently under examination. Fingers crossed for a favourable outcome. I'll hand over to Margaret.
Thank you very much, Adam. Look, I am happy to report that I have passed. So, but you can't call me doctor yet. I wish that were not the case, but I'm not a doctor yet. I'm just doing the revisions, so all good news. So thank you for that lovely, oops, I'll just go back to my opening slide. So hopefully you can all see my slide now. So thank you for that introduction, Adam. Thank you to Dana and the organisers. It's an absolute pleasure and an honour to be here. And I just wanted to say that whilst I've maintained a registered nurse non-practicing registration, and I would be absolutely dangerous if you let me anywhere near a patient now, having not touched one for 30 years or something, 20 years. I just want to say I'm actually in awe of all of you. So I'm actually your biggest fan. I'm your fan base, because I'm watching the nursing profession just go from strength to strength and the evolution of nurse practitioners and so forth. And I am, as I said, I am a huge fan, and I see that this is a huge area of growth and a really important part of the evolution of health systems, not just in Australia, but globally, with an increasingly large, highly skilled nurse practitioner workforce. So look, I'll get going on the bit that I know, so the thing that I'm good at these days is Medicare law. So my PhD is all around these topics. So I'm speaking to you as someone who's it's not my PhD is fresh. I'm still living it. I'm still doing the revisions. I'm still fixing the reference list. So I'm still experiencing the pain. So this is all very fresh and, it's raw for me. So there's the things that we're going to cover today for you. It's very high level. I can't go into huge amounts of details on everything because I've got till 6:15 to talk, but that's probably a lot of me talking. So I'm going to try and finish a bit quicker than that. But I will direct you to other places where you can find more information if you would like. On your screen are the things we're going to cover fairly fast over the next half hour or so. Give you a really good overview and get you started billing correctly. So let's just start. And I'm not going to bang on about constitutional law. It is something that I love, but I appreciate that nobody else loves it. So what I'm going to do is just give you this overview because it does help contextualize the way Medicare was built. It's like it's the anatomy and physiology of Medicare, if you like. So let's get going. So in 1946, we had one of our most successful referendums in Australian history. And what it did was it introduced this new section into the Australian Constitution. There it is in orange on your screen, right there. So it's section 5123A, and it's sort of an albatross around the health system's neck now, as it's turned out, but there it is. It enables the federal government to make laws for the provision of maternity allowances, widows' pensions, blah, 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 then medical and dental services, but not so as to authorise any form of civil conscription. So those 11 underlined words prevent the federal government from controlling doctors' fees. I can't go into the reasons why because it's too complex and we don't have time. Just trust me. Those 11 words are known as the civil conscription caveat, and they actually prevent the federal government not just from controlling doctors' fees, but your fees too. And I'll come to that in a moment. So what happened when we introduced Medibank on the 1st of July 1975? This was Gough Whitlam's Labor government, and it became Medicare later, but it's the same scheme. It just sort of morphed into Medicare via Bob Hawke in 1984. They used these two sections of the Constitution, Section 96 for public hospitals and Section 5123A for medical services, to pay doctors and all providers of medical services on a fee-for-service basis. Fee-for-service was not what they wanted, by the way, either, but it was really the only way to get around Section 5123A. So we've had 60 years of High Court decisions on interpretations of Section 5123A. So basically 3 points of law are settled in this country in relation to that clause. They are that the relationship between a provider of medical services and a patient, that's you're a provider of medical services, and a patient is a private contract, and it's governed by general principles of contract law. The civil conscription caveat only applies to medical and dental services. It doesn't apply to other things, those other things, widows' pensions, endowment, unemployment, pharmaceutical benefits. That's why we can have a pharmaceutical gap, and it works quite well in Australia because the government can control it, but the government could not control a gap on medical services, hence why you can't have co-payments. We'll come to that. Legal and practical compulsion may offend the caveat. So just know those things. It's a contract when you are providing a private service to a patient. Here's the law that says you provide medical services. So when they initiated this health insurance midwife and nurse practitioner determination 2015, you'll see there the definition of nurse practitioner services, and subsection A says that the services you provide are treated as if they're both professional services and medical services. And that brings you within the ambit of those provisions that I just discussed. So practically, don't get bogged down in the law. It actually doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about all of that. I just want to give you some practical sort of what it means in practice. So what it means is you've got some rights. You can charge whatever you like for your services, just like doctors. It also means that Australian patients can choose their nurse practitioners and their GPs and all doctors, because that provision it's a contract, it's a private contract. I can choose my doctor and my nurse practitioner. I can go anywhere I want and choose my doctor. I cannot be forced to have a relationship with any provider. And that is why things like healthcare homes started off being, sort of, we're going to force patients. And then when everybody realized they couldn't do that, they said, no, it's going to be voluntary. You can voluntarily enroll, because you can't force patients either. They can go and seek services wherever they like. But these wonderful rights, extraordinary rights, really, that you can charge whatever you like, come with huge responsibilities as well. So what it means is that all of the general requirements under the Health Insurance Act of 1973 apply to you, just as they apply to doctors. And very specifically, the key thing I want you to just be aware of is that you are responsible for your billing. Can't say somebody else did it, therefore I'm not responsible. You're responsible for your billing under your name and provider number. And you must ensure that you only provide clinically relevant services. That's the threshold for all Medicare services, is that the service you provide must be clinically relevant. What does that mean? There is a legal definition, which is that it has to be necessary for the treatment of the patient. Now I'm going to show you on the next slide, and we're going to get the unpleasant stuff out of the way at the beginning so we can move beyond it, because I'm going to show you what happens when you don't provide a clinically relevant service. And in that context, it's important to note that you also come within the ambit of the Professional Services Review Agency, which is the Medicare watchdog, and you can be found guilty of inappropriate practice. So let's have a look at the very first nurse practitioner who has been found guilty of inappropriate practice. So as I said, we're going to move on, but I thought let's just get this out of the way right at the beginning. So this is from the PSR Director's updates, and there's a link there, and I'll provide you with these slides. So you don't worry about writing things down. You can have access to this. You can go and look at it online yourself, but I've just literally taken a screenshot of it from the reports and put it on that slide for you. So this is the first nurse practitioner to come undone and be prosecuted, investigated by Medicare, very recent. So you can see the practitioner rendered longer duration attendance services at variance to all other nurse practitioners. So this nurse practitioner became a statistical outlier. Everybody else does this, and this one did higher, longer consultations, and that will trigger an investigation straight away. And the director investigated all those item numbers that you can see there. So what you can see is that the findings were MBS requirements were not always met, including the minimum time requirements. The practitioner's initiation of pathology was not always clinically indicated. There it is. It's in every PSR report. I say this to doctors over and over and over. If it's not clinically indicated, don't do it. And if it is clinically indicated, do it, but you have to meet all of the requirements of the item number every time you bill it. So you can see that the PSR director says this in every report, that some things were not clinically indicated, which is her way of saying it's not clinically relevant. The records were inadequate. We're going to talk about records. The practitioner prescribed antibiotics where there was no clinical indication to do so. And the practitioner prescribed PBS items outside PBS restrictions. The practitioner acknowledged they engaged in inappropriate practice. They have no option but to do that, by the way. You can't say, oh, without any admission as to guilt, I'm going to pay back $85,000. The scheme doesn't work like that. You have to acknowledge. So they force you into a confession. And in my PhD, I've talked about that. That's not straightforward. But anyway, they are forced to say they engaged in inappropriate practice, and this nurse practitioner had to pay back $85,000. The practitioner was lucky he or she, I don't know which, also was not restricted from billing for 12 months, because that happens very often as well. They can take away your Medicare entitlements completely. So it's a salient reminder that this is all very serious, but let's move on. Let's move on now. So we'll start at the beginning. I'm assuming people don't have a lot of knowledge on Medicare, so please forgive me, those of you who know this. I'm trying to, frame this for everyone. So this is the bulk billing law. It's Section 20A of the Health Insurance Act, and it's really simple. The law, a lot of this law is, chaotic, incoherent, all of that. That's what my PhD is about. But this is not. And I would never say that the bulk billing law is complex, really. It's pretty straightforward. There it is in front of you. Where a Medicare benefit is payable to an eligible person, that's your patient. So the Medicare entitlement is the property of the patient, not the provider. That's the way the system is built. So then what happens, you'll see the second person there that's circled in red, the practitioner, that's you. So bulk billing is a pretty straightforward two-step process. Step one, the eligible person, that's the patient, assigns his or her right to the payment of the Medicare benefit to the practitioner, that's you. And step two is the practitioner accepts the assignment in full payment of the medical expenses. Full payment, very, very, very important. So we're going to talk about what that means. Now, can you just see on the screen here, I've covered it and I wish I hadn't, but can you see where I'm just circling here? The practitioner may enter into an agreement, may. That is the word that makes bulk billing optional. It's voluntary. You don't have to bulk bill. You and your patient may enter into an agreement to bulk bill. And when you do, you have to accept the government rebate in full payment. So let's have a look at what it means. Implicit in the assignment of benefit, the patient has to consent, right? The patient has to consent. So yes, it is a legal requirement that the patient has to sign the DB4 form. And I can almost hear you all, even though you're on mute. I can hear you all roaring with laughter. I can. But it is a legal requirement. The patient must sign the DB4 form. And if you've got an easy claim terminal, the patient pressing yes, not you, the patient pressing yes is deemed to be a signature because it is a legal requirement, but you can throw it straight in the bin. Okay, I'm not going to go into why that is. It's on the department's website. And as I said, we're pressed for time. But it is a legal requirement that they sign it. You also cannot charge any other amount of money when you bulk bill. Now, this is very, very important. I've seen a lot of people, including nurse practitioners, get this wrong. When you think about bulk billing, you need to think about it as an either-or decision. Either you bulk bill and you accept what the government pays you, or you charge the patient a full fee up front, whatever you choose, and you can lodge the claim online for the patient or just hand them a receipt and they can go and get their rebates. So it's either or, but you cannot do both at the same time. You cannot do that and must not do that. So what you can't do, and I do see it, you can't say to the patient, I'm going to bulk bill you and you give me $20. I'll get the rest from Medicare, or the other way. I've seen doctors and nurse practitioners do it the other way and say, no, all you have to pay is $10. We get the rest from Medicare. That's illegal. It's not just a little bit illegal, it can be a crime. One doctor was found guilty of 96 counts of criminal fraud for bulk billing and charging another amount at the same time, which she called an operating theatre fee, operating and counselling fee. She called it a counselling and operating theatre fee. Doesn't matter what you call it, you can't charge it. Again, can't go into too much detail. The only exception is for certain vaccinations, which are not listed on the PBS. So just to be clear, just to recap, you can bulk bill or you can charge whatever amount you want. They're your two options because you can only provide outpatient service, and they're basically your two options. Try to keep that really clear in your mind. You can't do both at the same time. If you're bulk billing and taking money, you're doing something wrong. So just don't do that. So let's move now to another requirement that you have. You have to collaborate. Now, I'm sure you're all know about this. You've got to have these collaborative arrangements. And again, there's a huge amount of law. It goes on forever, to be honest, all the descriptions of collaborative arrangements. But look, don't get too bogged down in it. There's a couple just of key things you need to be aware of. The requirements are really broadly defined. And it can be really anything. You do not have to have a formal contract, any sort of service agreement with a doctor. That is not what is in the law. It's an acknowledgement. It can be an email communication to acknowledge you'll be collaborating. That is all that is required, but it must be in writing. So don't rely on a telephone, yeah, I'm happy to collaborate with you. That is not sufficient. That will not stand up if you are investigated by the PSR. You have to have it in writing. I've been putting some nurse practitioners, we're doing some work with them at the moment, and I've been connecting nurse practitioners with specialists, and I'm sort of introducing them via email, you know, dear nurse practitioner and doctor, this is to introduce you to each other, and you know, it's wonderful that you're collaborating on these patients, and I wanted to put you in contact, and blah blah blah. And then they have a bit of a to and fro to be very clear that they're collaborating. That's fine, that meets the requirements. But very important too, the collaborative arrangement that you have has to be in place before you claim to Medicare. I should have written that a little bit differently on the slide. It's not really before your first consult. You could have a consult with a patient and not claim to Medicare, but to claim to Medicare, you have to have a collaborative arrangement. Really, we're splitting hairs there. Just be very clear that you've got to have this in place before you see the patient. Now, the other thing to just say, and again, I've seen it confuse people, the law is very clear that you have to collaborate with a medical practitioner, any medical practitioner. You do not have to collaborate with a GP. That is not in the law at all. So it can be anyone, and all the nurse practitioners that I'm working with at the moment are all collaborating. Some of them do have collaborative arrangements with GPs, which is great, but I'm not putting them in contact with GPs. They're collaborating with specialists. So just be very clear about that. Now, let's move to the next topic, because again, we're already 10 to 6, and I just want to keep moving and also have some time to take some questions, hopefully. This is an area where I've seen a lot of problems specifically with nurse practitioners, also with doctors. They make a big mess of this too, but this is a really complex area of law, and I've dedicated quite a bit of my PhD to it. And in fact, one of the examiners made some comments about it because even the examiner was confused. So this is a really confusing area because you've got the intersection of the Health Insurance Act, but also this agreement called the National Health Reform Agreement between the federal and state governments, which regulates the way Medicare billing is able to take place inside public hospitals. Now, I know that some of you on the call know what I know. We all know the same thing. So I know what's happening out there, and there's a whole lot of things that will be changing, probably not in the too distant future, because the department's becoming aware of some of these things. Just be very clear. Unless your public hospital has a Section 19(2) exemption, what's known as, don't worry about what it means, you cannot and must not bill to Medicare anywhere inside the premises of a public hospital or any public health facility. A Section 19(2) exemption is remote facilities, right? So, you know, there's a list of them. There's a Section 19(2) exemption list that is kept updated on the Department of Health website. And if anybody wants a copy of it, a link to it, I'm happy to provide it. I looked at it just the other day because I wanted to check a particular hospital in the Northern Territory, which was on the list. But for example, South Australia has no hospitals on the list at the moment, as at a couple of days ago, none. So if you're practicing at a hospital in South Australia, I can tell you they do not have it does not have a Section 19(2) exemption, and you must not be billing in there. Some people get confused because they think they're sort of setting up their private practice. They've got a separate ABN, all of these things, and it's sort of existing inside a public facility. It isn't. That it does not work that way. And as I said, I don't have time to go into all the nitty-gritties, but I did put a very important section on your screen there, which is clause G19 of the National Health Reform Agreement, because really it's pivotal. Once you read it, you think, oh, right, that's pretty clear. So it says, an eligible patient presenting at a public hospital outpatient department will be treated free of charge. That also means not billed to Medicare as a public patient unless, subclause B, the patient has been referred to a named medical specialist who is exercising a right of private practice and the patient chooses to be treated as a private patient. So without going into all the details of what all of that means, because there's a lot of requirements in subclause B, you're not a medical specialist. So you must not be billing inside a public hospital. Now, let's look at your MBS item numbers. So I just put these on here for you. Many of you probably know these, and I copied that's directly from Medicare's information at the top of your screen there at the moment. So participating nurse practitioner attendances, they're your attendance items at the top. So you've got the face-to-face ones, the 4 standard ones there. Then you've got COVID-19 telehealth via video and COVID-19 telehealth when video is not available, which means phone. Now, I've already seen a nurse practitioner this year mistakenly continue to bill item 82215 because she does really long consultations. You all do, which is fantastic. Patients just would love that. And I know she spends a whole hour, you know, she spends all this time with them. But she billed 82215 and I had to pull her up and say, no, you can't bill that item. That's the wrong item. You didn't see this patient face to face. She said, oh, I don't know, what item? I said, well, was it video or phone? And she said, well, it was phone because the patient was in a remote location, didn't have video capability. And I said, okay, well, that's 91191. She said, I didn't even know. So please be careful, familiarise yourself with this. You can't keep using the old face-to-face items if that is not what you were doing. Now, there's other services there at the bottom of the screen. So you've still got the old patient end support for the old telehealth that existed prior to COVID. There's patient end support services there, and they are still relevant and still being used. There's specific aged care patient end services as well. There's pathology that you can order and do, and there's diagnostic imaging. I didn't put the list in because it's a really long list of diagnostic imaging services that you can provide. Now, there are some restrictions on access to the PBS. I'm not an expert on the PBS. I don't know much about those restrictions. So perhaps if that's a question that anybody has or anybody would like to know more about that, there might even be someone on the call who has more familiarity with the PBS restrictions than I do, and it would be wonderful if you could share that with us when we come to it. So again, in terms of going back to my PhD, it's often not what to bill, it's how to bill. That is what confuses people. And as I explained in my PhD, a doctor could be billing just one item number. A doctor might only have one item number that they bill regularly. I mean, not many would, but a lot of physicians only have 4. They only bill 4 item numbers. That's it. But they could be billing them wrong all the time. They could be bulk billing and charging a gap, bulk billing and not getting the patient to sign. They could be billing when it's not clinically relevant. They could be billing it to Medicare when it's workers' comp and it shouldn't be going to Medicare. So when I've tried to explain in my thesis the complexities around billing, it's not always what to bill, it's how to bill, when to bill, whether to bill. It's all those other areas where it gets really complex. So just to be very clear, these 4 points here for you, and it's very clear in the regulations for you, you can only bill for time when you are in direct communication with the patient. So you cannot bill when the patient's left and you're writing up notes, making phone calls, organising things. And I've seen, again, a nurse practitioner make a mistake there because I said, why did you bill 2 of these item numbers on the same day? And she said, oh, well, I spent an hour with the patient, then I spent another hour writing up the notes. And I said, oh, you can't do that. No, don't do that. You will be in trouble. you must not do that. And she didn't know, it was innocent. It was an innocent mistake. So it's time with the patient. It's time when you are on the phone with the patient, or the video is, you are in communication with the patient on video, or you have the patient in your room face to face. Now, nurse practitioners are restricted to single patient attendances. There's no groups sessions available to nurse practitioners. So one patient at a time. And just be very careful. Again, I just reiterate, you must satisfy all requirements of every item number you bill every time you bill it. Now, I've put there, consider recording start and finish times. There's no legal requirement to do that. I just think if I were you, I would do that. When I was working as a lawyer, way back as a lawyer in a general law firm, we had to put start and finish times all the time, because lawyers bill in 6-minute group sessions. It was awful, So every phone call, you answer the phone and you write, the first thing you write down is 5:59. And then you talk. And when you hang up the phone, you write 6:12. And I was in the habit of doing it. And I've thought that that's an easy thing for you to get into the habit of doing too, and a bit of a tip to actually record your start and finish times, because it will help you if you are ever investigated by Medicare. And just remember, bulk billing is bulk billing. It means don't take any additional money on the side. Now, record keeping, let's keep moving. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Record keeping requirements. Record keeping requirements for nurse practitioners are really onerous. When I read the regulations, I thought, well, this is insane, an insane amount of, administration, but it is the law. So you have to comply with it. The basic requirement for everyone who bills under Medicare, doctors, allied health, physios and psychologists and everyone billing under Medicare, the base requirement is that you must keep adequate and contemporaneous records. And again, I won't go into the long definition of what is adequate, but think of it like another practitioner should be able to take over the care of your patient, read it, and know exactly what's going on. No, you can think of it like SOAP notes. SOAP notes are quite a good template. Subjective, objective, assessment and plan. So subjectively, what did the patient tell you? What was the story? Objectively, what did you observe about the patient? Assessment, what is your assessment of this, and what are your diagnoses and differential diagnoses? Then your plan, what are you going to do? And contemporaneous means it should be happening as close as possible to the delivery of the service. So that's the standard requirement for everyone billing under Medicare. But you have requirements beyond the base requirements. And as I said, they go on forever. So you've got to be communicating constantly with your collaborating medical practitioners and keep written records of those communications, and ensure you pass copies of everything, every request, every referral, a request for pathology, diagnostic imaging. You just need to be communicating everything all the time. But it doesn't stop there. It's not just that you have to communicate with your collaborating medical practitioners. You also have to tell the patient all the time. You've got to tell them who you're collaborating with, and you've got to keep the patient in the communication loop as well. And as you saw from that PSR investigation, the nurse practitioner who had to pay back $85,000, there was a finding that the records were inadequate. So how are we going for time? We're doing well. So now coming to referring and referrals. So Division 4 of the Health Insurance Act sets out the manner of patient referrals. And in Regulation 96, one of the subregs says, and that's a quote, a participating nurse practitioner may refer a patient to a specialist or consultant physician. So you can refer to specialists. I mean, most of you probably know that, but some of you may not. And I found that the profession, the medical profession doesn't know this, because I work with specialists. Most of my clients, not all, we've got nurse practitioners and a few GPs, but 95% of our clients are specialists. And when I say to them, nurse practitioners can refer to you, they say, no, they can't. And I say, yes, they can. And here's the law. And they go, I would never have known that. So I'm doing a lot of your marketing for you as a profession. I hope you're pleased about that. I am educating medical specialists on nurse practitioners and the wonderful work you do, and that they can take referrals from you. And I put that as a fun fact because I was on a call the other day with one of our partner organisations that we work with, and she said, oh, well, we will get the nurse practitioners to refer to a GP. And I said, why would you do that? And she said, well, because, you know, they've got to collaborate with a GP. And I said, well, look, the first thing to note there is that you can't refer to a GP because GP services are unreferred services, just like nurse practitioner services. This is the front door to the health system. This is primary health care. You can't, there's no referral. What's the GP going to do with a referral? And she, I could see her mind, you know, spinning around. So I said, so the nurse practitioners can collaborate with a GP, and that's a great thing to do because we do want to join this up and get this continuity of care. There's no denying that. But you can collaborate with a GP. You're not referring to a GP. And so, you know, I've got a lawyer brain. So from a strict legal perspective, the only medical practitioners that you actually can legally refer to a specialist because they need your referral in order to claim specialist referred services, whereas a GP just continues claiming their usual stuff, makes no difference to them. So I'm just going to give you a case study here. Provider numbers. True story. Be warned. Be afraid. This was a nurse practitioner who had worked for 7 years in a public hospital in an advanced practice role. The public hospital kept asking her to get provider numbers across their various sites, and they kept saying they were doing everything they could to get her a formally approved nurse practitioner role. So she was actually employed as a registered nurse, not as a nurse practitioner. But they kept promising, and she kept, agreeing to their requests and doing everything she could. So she got a few provider numbers. They kept telling her they were going to secure this role. They never did. And eventually, after 7 years, they said, look, we tried. We just couldn't do it. Sorry. And she said, look, I'm going to move on. She was chatting to a nurse practitioner colleague about this, and the colleague became suspicious and said, I think you should register for PRODA. That's the provider online portal, Medicare. All register for it tonight if you haven't already. So her colleague said, register for PRODA, jump online now. It only takes 10 minutes. I want to have a look at your provider number. So guess what she found? The hospital had been using her provider number, all of her provider numbers, for 7 years for all sorts of reasons, to refer to, but to request a whole lot of pathology, specifically pathology, but also diagnostic imaging. She was stunned to see how active her provider numbers had been unbeknownst to her. So she got legal advice. But the good thing about jumping onto PRODA, you can cancel your provider number. You can do it. You own it. You can cancel it with a click. So she cancelled it, and that was the end of their claiming. Now, it may not have led to incorrect claims, but pathology shouldn't be billed either if the patient is a public patient. So it was a very messy situation, and she obviously got legal advice as well. So the lessons are: be very careful and be suspicious of public hospitals or anyone asking you for provider numbers. They're your responsibility. So I think we're doing pretty well. My take-home messages for you are that Medicare is a taxpayer-funded scheme, and therefore the government's got a constitutional obligation to preserve its integrity. So it has to police Medicare. It's not that it should just leave us all alone. That's a constitutional obligation. It's public money. It has to be governed and policed. And the department is aggressively pursuing compliance. And as you've seen, nurse practitioners are on their radar. The first nurse practitioner has already been pinged, and that's a sign that they are already looking. The other thing I would say is there are no medical billing experts in Australia, so be careful who you talk to about billing. That said, I was called an expert in court the other day for the very first time. And I guess now that I've done a PhD on it, perhaps I am, but In all honesty, I am still uncomfortable with the term because the law of medical billing is so vast that even though I've made it my life's work and spent 8 years doing a thesis and it's my area of law and all of that, and I've been doing it for decades, I learn new things every day. I find gaps in my own knowledge every day, where a doctor or someone will say to me, oh, no, you can do this. And I look it up and I think, oh, God, you can too. Because it just never ends, the complexity. So please be careful who you talk to about billing. My PhD has proven that the blind leading the blind way that Medicare billing law is passed down is a major contributor to non-compliance. So please be careful. The other thing to know is that MBS is not the law. That confuses people. It's just a book. What it is a departmental interpretation of a very complex statutory scheme. So obtain as much reliable information as you can. Now, one of the things I've done in my capacity as a lawyer, that's at my law firm website there in front of you. It's free and it's called mbsanswers.com.au. And I will answer complex questions. I'm not going to tell you what item numbers to bill. I'm not going to tell you things that you should know. I'm not going to tell you things that you can access on our online courses. But if you jump on there, you'll see I've already answered over 30 really good complex questions. And I've got about 20 in the queue awaiting answers, one of which is from a nurse practitioner. It's a fantastic question from this nurse practitioner. So that's a resource for you. So key things to remember for your billing. You as nurse practitioners, think of yourselves a bit like GPs. You are outpatients only in terms of billing to Medicare, but no public hospital outpatients unless your hospital has an exemption. You've got to satisfy all requirements of every MBS item number you bill every time you bill it. These are the same things I say to doctors. You've got to, they say, can I bill a 132? And I'll say, well, did you spend 45 minutes with the patient? They say, no, but it was really complex. So, well, the answer to your question is no. You have to satisfy all requirements. The patient being complex is one of the requirements, but another one is you have to take 45 minutes. If you did not take 45 minutes, you cannot bill that item number. So getting this through their heads is a challenge, but you have to satisfy everything. Read the item number. You've got to do everything it says every time you bill it. You have to have written collaborative arrangements and they must be in place before you see the patient. Bulk bill or charge upfront fees. Don't do both. And keep comprehensive records. Just assume everything you do, you've got to share it with everyone. And if you really sort of use that as your framework for billing, you probably won't go too far wrong. So how am I going for time? 6:13, right on time. So resources and opportunities. There's a link to our online nurse practitioner pack, and we've had some nurse practitioners sign up to that just the other day. Yeah, and you don't have to get the whole pack. You can just do a shorter course. And I've just updated the course actually today. I was doing some updates to it to make it really great for nurse practitioners. So it drills down into the law a bit better. But look, the other thing is we're doing some really exciting work with nurse practitioners in two areas. One is telehealth for the bush, which includes, I was speaking to a psychiatrist and a GP in a remote place last week, and they said, oh, we're desperate for nurses, get me nurses. So we have opportunities, so please contact us. And we've also got another organisation saying, please get me nurse practitioners, because there's a lot of opportunities for you guys right now. It just seems to all be happening at the moment, providing services from pharmacies and also via telehealth. So please get in touch, and there's our contact details there. Tom, our business development manager, is the best person to contact, and his email is on your screen. And it's 6:14, so I'm 1 minute ahead of time, and I will finish there. So I'm happy to take questions or whatever the organisers want us to do, whether we move on.
Thanks, Margaret. We've had a couple come through on the chat. One from Jason, who is our nurse practitioner guru for Dana. The public health system have developed policies which restrict public patient access to specialist outpatient clinics. If public nurse practitioners refer them to these clinics, how can we counteract this restriction?
Yeah. Look, that's a complex question, but another really good one. And perhaps it's one that it would be good for you to submit through that MBS Answers, because I can talk about that. The requirements in public hospitals are that the medical specialists have a referral. It doesn't have to be a referral from a GP. It can be a referral from a nurse practitioner. It can be any valid referral. It's just that the referral has to be to a named medical practitioner who is exercising a right of private practice. In the end, for some of these areas that are really grey and messy, you have to let go a little bit. Because remember that, and I say this to GPs too, they try and control it too. And I say, look, in the end, it's not your problem. You're referring your patient to a specialist who you want to refer them to. And remember, you don't own the Medicare rebate, the patient does. So ultimately, it's the patient's decision, not yours, not the specialist's, whether they agree to be bulk billed or not. And it is the specialist's responsibility to know whether they are legally enabled to bill or not. So you won't get in trouble for writing a referral, right? They'll get in trouble for billing incorrectly based on these other criteria. So I hope that sort of helps you. But if you'd like me to spell it out in writing, I'm really happy to do that. It's a good question, but maybe submit it through MBS Answers.
Excellent, thank you. We've got a few more, but we might save them till the end and just move on in the interest of time.
Thanks, everyone.
I can ask you to
stop sharing. Yeah, I'll do that. Great.
And I'll introduce our next speaker. I just want to stop and acknowledge Cameras, who have been an excellent supporter of our webinar series. So we've had a number of webinars that they've supported so far. So we thank them for their support. And our next speaker is Darren Smythe, who's speaking on transition to private practice. So Darren had his first taste of the drug and alcohol field in 1988 at a counselling centre in West Sydney, which provided the catalyst for him to embark on a career in the field. Throughout the past 30 years, he has worked across regional and remote Australia in various roles, including detoxification units, rehabilitation programs, community dual diagnosis, research, hospital consultation liaison, management, the prison environment, working in public and private practice within the drug and alcohol nursing field. During this time, he's contributed to acquire further skills, he's continued to acquire further skills and extended his knowledge base through obtaining further studies in anthropology, education and nursing. Currently works as a nurse practitioner for an NGO managing a community withdrawal program and is the immediate past president of Dana. The desire to transition into a non-government organisation with a lack of tenure security, collegial support and governance structures was a well-considered venture. Do I lose the security of a public health? Nevertheless, what I really sought was the ability to work to my full scope of practice, and therefore I grasped the challenge I so desperately needed. Setting up a service in an NGO has been a rewarding challenge, with the more valued assets of innovation and improvisation required to fit the nurse practitioner role into a GP type service. What is missing is the guidance on how, where, when and what to do. However, perseverance and stubbornness has been a worthwhile exercise. And on that, I'll hand over to you, Darren.
Hello, okay, let me get this up. I have to say I do love that photo. It does make me look a lot thinner. And thank you, Margaret. That was a bit mind-blowing, and I think I'm doing quite a few things wrong. I best get onto that pretty quickly. So thank you. And thank you for Dana to ask me to actually present on this matter. So let me begin. I've got 15 minutes, so I've got the stopwatch traveling beside me. So Private practice or the third space. Now, I probably need to go into that a little bit. And what do I mean by the third space? I think we tend to talk quite often about this dichotomy, the public versus private spheres as working as a nurse practitioner. But I believe there's a third space also, and that's working with a non-government organisation, an NGO, or a community managed organisation, a CMO. But it's a space that can provide you with the comfort of a salary, however, requires you the knowledge of working privately. So it's sort of mixtures of both, which I think can be a safe sort of step down for some people. Well, it is for me, especially in this COVID period. During this presentation, I'd also, like to ask those nurse practitioners that I know that are out there, Joe, Leanne, and others that are working privately, ask some questions, make some comments that you would like, and so I and others may be able to learn off you and better navigate through this transitional period.
We can't see your screen, Darren. Are you sharing with us?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We can't see it.
Oh, okay. Can you see that?
Excellent. Thank you. What would a Zoom webinar be without a tech issue?
Look, I'll go back to the first page. That's what you're looking at, that glamorous little slide there. So, okay. Glad you can see that. The quandary. Stay or go from public health. And I think this is a question that many of us ask ourselves. When I was offered this AOD nurse practitioner role in Quinn, and I'll tell you more about Quinn later, I suppose, like many others, was hesitant to leave what I'd call the security of the public health bosom and what was provided. However, I never really became an MP for the money side of things. As we know, if you're working in a senior clinical nurse consultant role, the money leap is not, extensive, and you're not going to pay your mortgage off considerably quicker. But it was for the opportunities it provided me. And I suppose the ability to expand my knowledge and, increase, work by full scope of practice. It was a little bit like, sometimes, as many of you would know, working in emergency, trying to get that young little resident doctor behind the emergency counter to provide 20 milligrams of diazepam rather than 5 because a seizure was quite imminent. And I think I got a little bit tired of that process and thought perhaps I should explore this role. But, looking at that private step, many nursing colleagues had asked me, aren't you concerned about losing your perks? And, what perks, I thought. Yes, I had long service, but wasn't exactly receiving sort of bonuses and incentives from the public health system. So I needed to consider that working for an NGO on a pilot 2-year program, it does hold some risks. Yep, definitely. As I might not be able to receive further leave without pay, which I did get granted 1 year of, which was great. And in New South Wales, you are entitled to apply for up to 3 years leave without pay. And I may have to resign if I remain in the new role without the guarantee of employment at the end of the pilot. And that is something definitely that rests on my mind, and security and, having a mortgage and so forth. The service was also a long distance from me. So it was another consideration I had to think about, prepared to travel to and from every day, but I'll go into more of that later. But nevertheless, after writing a couple of business cases to support the role of a AOD nurse practitioner in the health district I was working, which was glaringly obvious to many, desperately needed, was also a financial benefit to the service that was hemorrhaging money severely in a VMO operating system. So I became, I suppose, increasingly more frustrated that management lacked the courage, I suppose, an insight to pursue developing the role further, whether they considered that as ramifications from the AMA, if they had to reduce their hours. Some things aren't really voiced to you. But having stated this, as I had worked as a nurse practitioner in 3 different roles prior, I was not ready to sit and wait any longer for this to occur. And after being offered the opportunity to take on the role, I'd been in discussion, I must say, with Quinn, the organisation, for a couple of years in a consulting capacity, looking at the role. So I definitely wanted it, but wasn't sure if this was going to be really easy to do, to step out of the public health system. So I really needed to reflect on why I really wanted to be an MP, and that was so I, as I said, could work to my full scope, which meant to me I could provide a holistic model of care to patients with substance issues and where I felt respected for my knowledge. I feel in public health, as many of you might agree, not in all places, whether spoken or not, quite often attention lingers in the air for nurses, and especially when you move into that nurse practitioner space. Know your place. You are a nurse in a medical model, basically. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is doctors versus nurses, because quite often it can be our nursing colleagues that we face some of the significant issues from also. But I think it's really important to highlight that can be a barrier. So this was my idea, the public first private, and that's me on the left with the little white frock and the hat many years ago, doing as the Medicare has advised. And here I am, a little bit more vibrant with colour radiating on the right in the private sphere. So perhaps a little over exaggerated, but for me, it does have quite a few differences. So Quinn, I was employed as an AAG nurse practitioner in the non-government organisation Quinn on the Gold Coast to design, construct and operate the first MP nursing-led ambulatory home-based community withdrawal program. So although not relying on Medicare to sustain the service, salary, I'm required to develop the service, which I'll probably send you an email also, Margaret, in relation to Medicare. So as you can see there, the various services that Quinn does offer, and they are located across Queensland in various spots. You can get on their websites and have a bit of a look, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory there. So as stated, I applied for a 1-year leave without pay, basically to explore what I'd been so desperate to explore, I think, really. I think I'd been banging on in it in Dana, pushing the nurse practitioner flag for so many years, wasn't ready to give it up, although I sat on the fence at one point and thought, no, look, get back into it, see if you can work to that full scope and see how rewarding this will be. So I thought, well, I can hold on to my bonuses and incentives, and I'm off exploring while the opportunity exists, really. Also, please take care of my long service and annual leave, I advised. So I commenced earlier this year in the position in Quinn. The position is partly funded by the Gold Coast Primary Health Network. Quinn also known as the Queensland Injectors Health Network, to design, as I said, construct and operate the first MP home-based detox program. But due to the fact the service was around 130 kilometres north of where I live, and with COVID increasing, population of telehealth, which was advantageous, I think, to be quite honest, we're able to come to an agreeable decision that I do 4 days, 4 10-hour days, 2 days on the Gold Coast and 2 days at home doing telehealth. That might change, but, thought, wow, this actually is possible, go for it. So Quinn has continued to expand its services from its origins of providing services to people with who use illicit drug use intravenously to cover more counselling, harm reduction, various group programs, needle syringe programs, GP service in Brisbane, education, hepatitis C management from another MP, and now community withdrawal program pilot on the Gold Coast. So here's our little office in a factory-built area in Burleigh Heads, which has been internally set out in two sections, one for an NSP and the other one like a medical clinic, like a GP service. Just can't see it from the outside when you're getting your car oil and gas changed. So here's our little clinic. So what I was required to do when starting here is really, I had to sort out the floor coverings, paint the walls, select all the furniture, add the downlights. And now we have this great little funky clinic. I have an administrative assistant and an RN to assist with the program who runs the clinic room. What would I sort of say I had to do and what would I advise? Definitely understand the legislation. And some of it, I think, you know, after hearing from Margaret, that's going to be a continual thing. So I'm glad I've got my last slide up here. Not this one, but I was really required, as I said, to start from scratch and develop that model of care, the policies, the procedures, the processes, as stated, and set up the physical space, explore the need, and more importantly, network with the various other services, none of whom I really knew, not working in Queensland. And this included developing steering committees to seek that collegial support. And as always, the need to adapt to software that did not possess really the suite of programs you're used to in the public service to manage someone with a substance use disorder, especially the risk management stuff, which was a considerable, really, amount of work. Oops, sorry. Writing vanished there. What I would say too in relation to that, sorry. So, what would I say? As I said, understand the legislation. So here I was out on my own. Farmers started approaching, not that this was new for me. There was a problem with working for Darren for many years. In Queensland, I wasn't aware, you know, I couldn't prescribe medicinal cannabis. You know, could I dispense medication from the clinic? Could I, e-scripts being used in Queensland when I'm working in when I'm down at home in New South Wales, 130 kilometres away? Really understand the legislation and start digging, because it definitely becomes your friend. I mean, you could obviously go on further and further in that, but it's not really advantageous right here. I would also say really understand your state and national guidelines, as these will keep you and your patients safe, really. Seek clinical supervision and mentors, you know, to support you. What an NGO can offer is amazing. However, they really do at times lack the multidisciplinary teams and clinical governance. And therefore, for me, as supervisor, mentor, and collaborator, is a great opportunity to reflect and seek guidance. I do want to really thank a nurse practitioner friend, PhD candidate, Mary Fennick. Hello, Mary out there, who's a nurse practitioner who works in Quinn with me, for really her ongoing support and belief that the holistic nursing focused program was where we had the edge. However, was also someone that had completed the transition into private practice and believed her and her patients were reaping the rewards. We also had a lot of fun during our trial. Right at the middle of a COVID lockdown, which was a lot of fun, and I was trapped down here in New South Wales and was required to adapt via telehealth. The trial allowed me then to review all of the processes covering the entire episode of care. Do you have too many forms, not enough forms? Brainstorming's really helpful. And I suppose I would just say start slow and continue to revise on a regular basis. As a pilot, this is an ever-evolving model. So just so yeah, there have been a couple of hurdles along the way, and some tricky, unexpected matters. And I suppose one of them has been the hurdle with Medicare, as the program is partly funded by the Primary Health Network. I've not been able to access this, or the patients haven't. This is currently being explored. I'm not sure if a funded program or a percentage thereof impacts access to MBS items. Perhaps someone out there has the answer to this. Really consider when you're looking at staff, although, you know, drug and alcohol is our specialty, it still doesn't have thousands of nurses waiting around the corner to jump in, and an NGO will quite often not pay the same salary as public health. So attraction can be difficult. Although I had over 50 RNs apply, very few had any experience whatsoever. So now we do have a great RN. I'm hoping retention is not as difficult as attraction. Have to also look at the evaluation and research part of this, and tenders are out seeking experienced academic nursing researchers. So I really want this program to be highly successful for patient care, for Quinn, AAD nurse practitioners, and the specialty really of drug and alcohol nursing. So another thing I would say is a new program, and I'm not far off finishing. I know I'm a minute over. A new program going to be really like a lifelong overdue lifeline, I should say, to many who will be asked to, and you will be asked to step outside your scope of practice and comfort, but set your boundaries and limits early and expand when you feel comfortable, and seek support and recognize your limitations, which I've had to do. We don't know it all. As all of you know, we haven't seen the end of COVID, and as I live in another state, border closures are also concerned. This is another issue for me, but I am I have to travel on the motorway every day and past lunatics, so that hasn't stopped me yet. So we can always place barriers in front of ourselves to reach what we want, but you won't know if you don't try. When I thought, I know that sounds bloody cheesy, but you know what, perhaps there's some truth in it. So last slide, and I think it gets back to what I was saying before, that I really think when you enter the profession of nursing, it is lifelong, no matter whether you're studying or you're out there 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So thanks for listening, and back to you, Adam.
Thanks, Darren. Interesting model, and good to hear that your painting and decorating skills improved through setting it up. We'll just might move on and do some questions at the end just because of time. So just share my screen. You can all see that. Excellent. So this is a little bit of whistle-stop tour, and I'll try and keep it brief so we've got some time for questions for other presenters. Looking at nurse practitioners in Australia, as I mentioned before, it was an extension of our State of the Workforce document that you hopefully have seen. It's available on the Dana website. So we went a little step further. There was a little bit that came out of that about drug and alcohol nurse practitioners. So we really wanted to kind of follow on from that, map drug and alcohol nurse practitioners in Australia, have a look at some models of care that drug and alcohol nurse practitioners were undertaking, and some of the curly questions as well. Look at some barriers and obstacles to entry and endorsement, and that really kind of broad question: what are the other issues that nurse practitioners and candidates are facing in Australia? You can imagine there were some really interesting responses that we'll have a look at. So we did this in two phases, exploratory really. So an online survey, much like we did with the workforce project, thanks to members of the Dana Nurse Practitioner Subcommittee who formulated the questions for this, particularly Jason Harrison, who did a lot of work spearheading this survey itself. And we followed on with some qualitative interviews, 14 of those via telephone with our fantastic research assistant, Diana, who also did the State of the Workforce project. A little bit of a spread towards the eastern seaboard of Australia, had 29 nurse practitioners respond. Unfortunately, we didn't get any from the Tasmania, Northern Territory or Western Australia. And we also had 12 candidates respond to the survey as well. Similar sort of thing, we missed out on Tasmania, Northern Territory and Western Australia. And unfortunately, APRA data still does not list nurse practitioners. I think the last document they did in 2019 says that there were 48 of you in Australia that called drug and alcohol your specialty as nurse practitioners. But obviously we're a couple of years down the line. Some really fantastic tools to be able to do that with the nursing workforce overall that we talked about in the State of the Workforce document, but fairly limited when it comes to nurse practitioners, unfortunately. So we're really relying on self-report here. Age groups of our participants here: nurse practitioners in blue, nurse practitioner candidates in yellow, as you can see. Again, following on from our State of the Workforce document, most nurse practitioners here are older, likely more experienced, and highly qualified candidates. There's a bit of a blip or a jump there in 31 to 35, and then a few older candidates, but largely spread across the board. And where do nurse practitioners work? Survey results say, again, blue for nurse practitioners, yellow, orange for candidates, mostly in pharmacotherapy clinics, consultation liaison in the community. A few scattered across there in other areas, but that was the mainstay of where people worked. We also asked nurse practitioners to provide a numerical value to the percent, or the percentage of their time, I should say, they spent providing particular services. The services listed there, 26 responded, and as you can see, no surprises that pharmacotherapy was done by most. Alcohol and opioid pharmacotherapy was by and large the largest percent of nurse practitioners were doing that kind of work. A little less withdrawal management, Hep C treatment, telehealth, chronic pain management was down there a fair bit. Telehealth, this might have shifted somewhat. We did collect this data in 2020. So I suspect it might be a little bit different, but we'd have to revisit that to see. We also asked the number of hours that people spent per week doing their duties, prescribing, 9.79, direct patient care, bulk of people's work, documentation, lazy 10 hours a week. Don't we love documentation in all facets of nursing? And 5.57 for consulting or liaising with GPs, hospitals, community-based services, and the all-important task of maintaining relationships with health professionals. You can see standard deviations are listed there, but there was a pretty wide spread for that maintaining relationships. Some people doing less, some people doing a lot more. And then we went on to a qualitative process, which was basically telephone interviews with a semi-structured questionnaire, as we did for the workforce document. We had 14, and you can see here we had nurse practitioners, again, mirroring largely New South Wales and Victoria, but we've got a nice little spread of settings, and we had a few candidates, which was nice as well, so we could talk to them about issues they were facing. And just for a little overview of what we heard, these are some of the themes that have come out of it. Availability of the nurse practitioner role was the big one, and in fact lots of people talked about this. And with this stuff, there's probably quite a few people on this Zoom webinar that participated in this process, so I have a feeling that I'm preaching to the converted here. Lots of people saying that they got their endorsement and it took them a long time to get an actual nurse practitioner position. In this case, a year, 12-month period of negotiation, lack of jobs, lots of talk around people saying, look, I have completed it, or I'm near completing it. I don't know what I'm going to do. It was interesting to note that there were people that had to wait a fair period of time to actually work in the position after endorsement. And there were a few comments as well around the overall healthcare system and the perception of importance of the nurse practitioner role. So this candidate pretty openly said that drug and alcohol wasn't an area of importance, and much like what we saw in our overall document of the nursing workforce, you know, we aren't considered to be a serious specialty. We're not real nurses. We heard comments like that. And here we're seeing that if you're in ED, renal, or any other fields like that, you'd be more important than drug and alcohol, which is a bit concerning, really. We start to link this to some of the literature reviews that we're looking at around the lack of prescribers. It's a big issue in Victoria. It's probably a big issue across the country, I suspect, if we would have broadened that out. Of course, there's issues around actually undertaking the study to become a drug and alcohol nurse practitioner. And, you know, through conversations with people who are undertaking this at the moment, not just in drug and alcohol, but other areas, it's quite challenging. A lot of work involved in actually completing a master's degree to become a nurse practitioner or meet that second pathway and those APRA requirements. You can't really do it without their support, the support of your employer. There's so much involved. You need time off to do exams, study days. If your management aren't on board, it's really difficult. And I thought this was a really kind of poignant comment. What do you mean you need another day off next week? You know, as Darren mentioned on the last slide, it's really important that we continue our education. But I once had a manager say to me, but our bread and butter is to be here for patients, so don't expect time off to do that. And that really struck me, because that was what was coming through here as well. It's a really difficult course of study from what we're being told, what you've probably been through, and do employers value that? Are they giving people time off? There was also a flip side of this coin where people said they did get study leave. They also got financial support, but that was pretty minimal from our participants. We come back to the lack of undergraduate education in drug and alcohol for nursing and medical, both specialties that it's pretty open and it's been researched quite extensively. Dana have done some work on this in nursing. There's been work done around the world actually for nursing. There's also been a little bit of work done with medical as well. They're not getting a lot of undergraduate education. And there was lots of anecdotes like this where people were saying that they become very skilled in their specialty, constantly teaching. They were the ones being consulted around high-level stuff that really, you know, treatment plans for people. And this was a path that a lot of people walked actually, where they got to the point of clinical nurse consultant, high level. They were doing all the input, providing all the input into treatment of patients, consumers, and had then been told, why don't you go and become a nurse practitioner? And that's how they kind of fell into it, working at that high level already. And I did kind of hear this ring through before. The comment here about ringing a doctor about a patient they were concerned about, and the doctor saying, I won't discuss anything like this with the nurse. So there were a few comments around legitimacy of the role. And I think this is something that we probably battle with across all drug and alcohol nursing, but this was certainly something that came out, not in every case. There were really nice examples of people working collaboratively, but there's a real concern that we need to kind of elevate the legitimacy of our role, nurse practitioner's role. I'm not going to talk to a nurse and hung up. It's fantastic, isn't it? How do we battle that? So this is just a bit of a brief overview, but there were some other issues that came out and were discussed as well, and we're in the process of finalising the report. So we're hoping to have it on the Dana website in 4 to 6 weeks after we've had it designed and made pretty for consumption. There's a lot of diversity in models of care, and this often blended into other roles and areas. So our idea of a traditional drug and alcohol nurse practitioner may have not rung true across all of Australia. So we looked at pharmacotherapy back there being 80 to 85% of what nurse practitioners are doing, or nurse practitioners are doing it, 80 to 85%. There's lots of other nurse practitioners who are calling themselves drug and alcohol nurse practitioners, but working in a lot of areas such as primary care and physical health. So there's a real blurring in the models of care. And starting out with this, you know, we probably thought that we'd see pretty stock standard models in terms of what people were doing, really based on drug and alcohol treatment, but it wasn't the case at all. They cut across a wide variety of settings. People are doing some really interesting stuff out there. So it's a role that's really evolving. The other issue was pathways, and most of the people we spoke to in the survey, 90%, almost 90%, almost about 88%, undertook Pathway 1. As you know, Pathway 1 is the nurse practitioner master's degree, but there was also an emergence of people doing Pathway 2. So that's where the board certified people as doing an equivalent path of leading to the nurse practitioner endorsement. And a big issue that's coming out of that when you start to look at the offerings for Pathway 1 nurse practitioner master's degrees is there's quite a few universities that are discontinuing it because they don't think it's worth their cost, basically. They're saying they're really expensive courses and it's not worth them running them. So there is a worry that Pathway 2, well, not a worry, but Pathway 2 will grow, I believe, as a result of this in the future. So although most people are doing Pathway 1, we're probably going to have to be a bit more strategic and look at Pathway 2 and how we can make that as rigorous. Most people that were doing Pathway 2 had felt that people doing Pathway 1 had a better road into becoming a nurse practitioner, but again, this was diverse. And the last comment that we explored in qualitative work was around how do we validate or credential drug and alcohol nurse practitioners, and not necessarily attaching a credential to them, but how do we know that they hold the knowledge and skills to be calling themselves a drug and alcohol nurse practitioner once they're endorsed? There's a lot of people saying they work in addiction or various areas. How do we know that they've got the requisite knowledge to work with people with substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder? So that's a big area of concern that you know, people can hang out their shingles, so to speak, and say they treat addiction despite working in other areas. Again, these are some issues for down the track. As I mentioned, our State of the Workforce document was released last year. It's available on our website as a free download PDF. It covers some of the issues that the nurse practitioner workforce come across, but we expanded a lot more during this study. So feel free to download and read. And there's a lot of qualitative work on our workforce in there, as well as a nationwide survey. I'll just get up the final slides. So we can officially launch what we're here for. And that's not, is that full screen? Or is that just the PowerPoint?
That's just the PowerPoint.
Was it? Is that better?
Yeah.
So take a moment to acknowledge Indivior have provided financial support for the creation, generous financial support of the creation of this document, which I'm assured is now available for download on the Dana website. So this was developed by our nurse practitioner subcommittee and other fantastic nurse practitioners as basically a ready reckoner guide to setting up private practice for nurse practitioners. Lots of fantastic practical information in there and some excellent links to some of the information we've discussed here today. So that's also available on the Dana website. And just a quick plug on our next webinar. So you may be aware that Dana had a standards and competencies document for drug and alcohol nurse practitioners. We've had a working group that have worked tirelessly to update that document, and we'll be releasing it on Thursday, 27th of May. More details to come via email for that one. I'll keep an eye on the Dana website. And that's thank you. And we've left 10 minutes for questions, and rather than type them in, I think you can raise your hand on Zoom if you're going to come on the microphone and ask questions of our panelists for today, our presenters for today, or feel free to type them in the Q&A.
I've just got a quick question here from the deep. I was just wondering if Darren could say a couple of words about the new book that we've just launched. I know there were some points that I'd asked him to make about it.
Yeah, sure, Colleen. I'll be very quick. Look, a couple of years ago, as the president of Dana, became more and more, I suppose, increasingly aware of nurse practitioners wanting to, I suppose, branch out into private practice, drug and alcohol, and but without necessarily having the knowledge to do so. And so in 2019, when we had the Dana conference, we also had the inaugural Drug and Alcohol Nurse Practitioner Symposium. And what sort of came out of that was this real thirst for how do we leap from public-private space? What is the legislation? What are the frameworks that we need to look at, the clinical governance to support us? And I think that's sort of really lacking possibly in the courses, and it really is learning by baptism and doing so. So came together, and basically it was, you know, possibly a manual might be the way to go. And thanks for Adam in regards to thanking Indivior, because they were very much there to support the development of the manual. And also probably just like to thank all the nurse practitioners that really contributed to this manual. It did go around to quite a few different people, and to Jason Harrison, who's, you know, holds that nurse practitioner portfolio on Dana, and for Colleen Blooms, the Done It CE, who basically, you know, with her knowledge and skill, really brought the whole manual together over a lot of bouncing and massaging over the time. And I think really this sort of launched out of the fact that Dana is very well aware of the value add that nurse practitioners provide to patients and the healthcare system throughout this country. And so I'd like to say thank you, and thank you that it's finally actually completed. And I hope people are able to use it to their benefit and maybe access some of that legislation that we were discussing quite earlier. So thank you. Back to you, Adam. Sorry.
Just keeping an eye on the questions, but it looks like you've answered them all behind the scenes, Darren.
Yeah, I got a little bit busy.
I saw another question from Jason before that I was interested in. If the MBS benefit for the patient is for the patient, then why is the medical profession so against letting nurse practitioners have better access to MBS item numbers to reduce costs for patients receiving services from nurse practitioners?
Ooh, is that one for me?
I think so.
Look, the answer to that, that's politics. That's what is happening there. Look, you know the answer to these questions. The nurse practitioners are moving forward, pressing forward, and you must continue that battle. One of the problems is that obviously there is a threat, that there is a oversupply of GPs, certainly in urban areas, and they don't want there's a bit of a turf war going on there. But the other problem from the government perspective is that there are huge problems with compliance in Medicare at the moment, like huge. It's 2.1 to 3.6 billion a year is incorrectly claimed from Medicare, and that's actually very conservative, knowing what I know. That's about 5 to 15% of the scheme's total costs. It's much more than that. Those of us who work in this area know that it's probably could be 25% of the scheme's total cost is incorrectly claimed. So the government also is really struggling to keep control of the scheme and keep, maintain scheme integrity. So opening it up, it's not necessarily about you as nurse practitioners, it's opening it up to anyone is risky at the moment until we can get some control of it. So there's a whole lot of competing interests. There's the politics, there's the turf wars, there's the challenges the government has with compliance at the moment. And these are battles that are going to be fought in the coming years. You're just going to have to be patient, I think, but keep pressing forward because nurse practitioners are critically important in the future landscape of health service delivery, not just in Australia, but globally. And certainly the work I'm doing out in remote Australia at the moment, there's no GPs. So it's not a question of saying, oh, it should be a GP. You can't answer that by saying, well, there aren't any. And following from that, it's not satisfactory to say, well, I prefer a patient has nothing if they can't have a GP. That's not an acceptable response. We have universal health coverage in this country. So nurse practitioners are critically important in the area, like remote health specifically. So I've gone off a little bit from you, a very good question, but it's a complex question and it's just going to take time.
I suppose, Margaret, I'd ask you whether it's possible, you talked about those opportunities for AOD nurse practitioners, possibly providing telehealth to those rural or regional areas that you discussed earlier. Have you utilised Dana to promote that out to the various nurse practitioners or the Australian College of Nurse Practitioners? And you must maybe be able to cast your web out a little bit further and get more people that are interested.
Look, thank you, Darren, for that. I understand. Look, one of my team, Tom, is actually on this call. He's one of our participants. Tom's our business development director, and I know that he has been in communication with Colleen, and I believe they are going to promote this opportunity. Because as I said, I had a call last week with a GP who works in a very remote part of Australia, Aboriginal community, and the big problems for her are mental health, including drug and alcohol. It's all, you know this, right? This is fine, they go together. And she said, we desperately need support. And I talked to her about nurse practitioners. She's fantastic. She said, get them for me. I need them. And we talked about the pathways and having the psychiatrists, because I've got some psychiatrists lined up. I've got this wonderful GP running this huge Aboriginal health clinic, and they need support. They need sort of weekly consultations for these people. They need intensive treatment. There are no psychologists. Psychologists don't bulk bill. That's the other thing. This would be bulk billing. That's the only other thing to be mindful of, because this is an Aboriginal community. It has to be bulk billed. But there's other areas we're working in where that's not necessarily the case. Doesn't have to be. But there are a lot of there's a great deal of need, and the people I'm speaking to in these remote areas, including the GPs out there, that they would love to work with you. They'd love to. They just want support. So there's a lot to be optimistic about. Yeah, and not every GP, you know, has many have said, they're not all sort of anti-nurse practitioners. I'm certainly speaking with a lot of specialists and GPs who would love to collaborate.
Mm.
A couple more questions coming through, but we're really out of time, aren't we? I'd probably suggest checking the website that Margaret mentioned earlier. I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to Margaret for coming along. Hoping we can call you Doctor soon.
Fingers.
Looking forward to wearing the funny hat. And thank you to all our attendees as well. It's certainly great to see so much passion for nurse practitioners in drug and alcohol, and it's great to sit as the president of this organisation and see all of this hard work that's gone on. So I take my hat off to all of you, and I know we've got people from other organisations on the call as well that have been working tirelessly around the MBS review. So I certainly take my hat off to you, and thanks for your hard work. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.